Welcome, everyone. If people could take their seats. It looks like there is still some more room up in the balcony, which you get to by turning left right out the back exit. If you can't find a seat, I think most of the seats up here look like they're taken. So welcome everyone that's here in the room. It's wonderful to see you. Welcome to all of those who are engaging tonight's discussion via live stream. Welcome, we're glad that you're here. And also all of those who are in the overflow room. Welcome, and we're sorry that we don't have room for you to sit in here. We got over 800 requests for tickets for this evening, and this is a free and open public discussion, and it's the largest audience that we've ever had respond in this way, so it's a testimony to what we're doing this evening. So my name is Serene Jones, and I'm the president here at Union Theological Seminary. And this is the, yes, we like Union, yay! It's so wonderful to look out and see so many people also not from Union here. Because it's wonderful for the work of this school to have a reach that goes beyond our classrooms and the walls of this institution. So a particular welcome to you. This is the first in a new series that we're starting this year that's called Faith in America. And each month we are going to take a critical national issue and shine the spotlight on it and engage it from both a political and a theological and faith perspective, and create panels and discussions where collectively we can wrestle with them. Just so you know, Wednesday, November 9th, the day after the election, Bill Moyers is going to be here talking about the election results with some guests that I think will be quite interesting. Wednesday, December 7th, we're going to have a gathering discussing the aging of America and the new workforce for social justice. What are many second career people doing in terms of pushing the needle forward on many social issues? January 18th, we'll be looking at a new documentary on Reinhold Niebuhr. February 8th, we will be looking at police community relations and community policing. March 15th, we're going to have a special session with Corinna Gore on Indigenous people and the issues of faith in the environment. And finally, April 5th, Lema Bowie is going to be talking about women's role in ending violence globally. So it's quite a lineup. But we are so excited that this evening, to start it all off, we are joining together to think about a very important issue, that is the issue of invisible women in an age when we are thinking a lot and working hard to change the terms of and the conditions under which people experience mass incarceration. Women and girls are often overlooked in that discussion. And at the center of that discussion this evening is, I am very happy to introduce her as Union Theological Seminary's visiting professor, Michelle Alexander.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I am so excited to be here tonight. What a joy it is to see all of you here, here to spend some time in deep reflection and dialogue about a critically important but too often neglected issue, the experience of women and girls in the era of mass incarceration. Just several weeks ago, I was asked if I was willing to host the first event in this Faith in America series, and I was honored, but also a bit concerned, worried that I might not be able to pull it off. There wasn't a whole lot of time for planning, and I wondered, would I be able to find great people on relatively short notice, and what topic would I choose? I was assured that I could pick any topic, anything at all. This was an opportunity to engage the Union community and beyond in dialogue about whatever might be weighing on my heart and mind. Well, I can say that my concerns about this event were unfounded. We have an extraordinary group of women joining us tonight, some of my true heroes, or should I say sheroes. And choosing this topic was not difficult at all. I have been wanting to create space for some time now to really think deeply and be in dialogue about the issues facing women in particular at this moment in our nation's history. I've become increasingly alarmed in recent years about the many ways in which women and girls are routinely marginalized and rendered invisible in public debates about criminal justice reform and mass incarceration, and I have been painfully aware of my own complicity. In my book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration and the Age of Colorblindness, I stated explicitly in the introduction that I had no intention of exploring in any depth the unique experience of women. I wrote, "This book paints with a broad brush, and as a result, many important issues have not received the attention they deserve. For example, relatively little is said here about the unique experience of women, Latinos, and immigrants in the criminal justice system, though these groups are particularly vulnerable to the worst abuses and suffer in ways that are important and distinct. This book focuses on the experience of African American men in the new caste system. I hope other scholars and advocates will pick up where this book leaves off and develop the critique more fully and apply the themes sketched here to other groups and other contexts." And then the book goes on, and I wrestle with the impact of the war on drugs and the Get Tough movement, primarily on Black men, describing how this system of mass incarceration was born out of the ashes of slavery and Jim Crow, how it has been wrongly justified as driven by a response to crime and crime rates, but instead is rooted more firmly in our nation's history around race and our refusal to deal with racial anxieties, resentments, and racial divisions and stereotyping that persist today and which could not be any more evident than in the political election that is going on today. Mass incarceration has been born out of these fears and anxieties. It is a system that has destroyed families and communities, animated by a war on drugs that has not been a war at all on a thing, a substance, but has been a war on people, primarily poor people and people of color. In the space of 3 short decades, our nation's prison population quintupled. We went from a prison population of about 300,000 to over 2 million. Several million people are under correctional control, if not in prison or jail, on probation or parole, and tens of millions of people find themselves locked permanently in a second-class status, stripped of the very rights supposedly won in the civil rights movement, like the right to vote, the right to serve on juries, and the right to be free of legal discrimination in employment, housing, access to education, and basic public benefits. As a nation, we've done it again. We've rebirthed an enormous system of racial and social control. After the book was published, people would sometimes ask me why I didn't include a chapter or chapters on women's experience. Sometimes I get a little defensive and explain that the book grew out of my experience working as a civil rights lawyer, representing victims of racial profiling and police brutality, and the overwhelming majority of my work involved complaints of police violence experienced by Black men. That's where my journey in this work began, and that's where I began in my book. I'd often say I was concerned about the experience of women, but I'd point out that more than 90% of the incarcerated population were men, and the extraordinary increase in incarceration was driven by arrests and convictions and harsh sentences of men of color, especially Black men. I'd say there's nothing wrong with focusing a book on the experience of one specific subgroup, the experience of Black men, just like there's nothing wrong with writing a book about Latino women or trans women or white men and their experience in relationship to the criminal justice system. I said it can be valuable to use the experience of Black men and as a lens through which we can begin to ask questions, larger questions about the system as a whole and our nation or society at large. But in recent years, as our nation begins to reconsider our system of mass punishment, and a supposedly bipartisan consensus has begun to emerge that some downsizing must be done, I am aware that time and time again, precisely the same kinds of justifications and rationalizations I articulated for not focusing on the experience of women are trotted out again and again as a justification for not talking about women this time, not at this meeting, not at this gathering, maybe another. Now, let me be clear, I haven't changed my mind entirely. I still believe it is worthwhile to write and to speak about the experiences of Black men in our criminal justice system. 2 books have been published recently arguing that Black men themselves remain largely invisible in discussions about inequity in our society. Becky Pettit wrote a great book, Invisible Men, Mass Incarceration and the Myth of Black Progress, which points out that incarcerated people are erased from poverty statistics and unemployment statistics, thus masking the severity of racial inequality in the United States. And another wonderful book has been written, Invisible Men, a contemporary slave narrative in the era of mass incarceration that uses story, the story of one's experience in this era of mass incarceration, to describe the meaning and significance of this moment. I recommend both of these books. But tonight, we're going to focus on women, how women have been rendered invisible time and time again in ways that are not only distinct and unique, but that pose a fundamental challenge to movement building for transformational justice itself. Tonight, we're going to hear what's at stake, what is lost when women are erased or forgotten in conversations about criminal justice reform, and we'll consider how our understanding of what justice requires changes when women's experience is moved back toward the center rather than relegated to the margins. I am mindful of the fact that we are having this conversation in a seminary, a place where students gather to consider the meaning and significance of religion to our world. And so I invite all those who speak tonight, those on the panel as well as those in the audience during the Q&A, to consider the spiritual and moral dimensions of all that we explore here tonight. In one of my favorite books, Jesus and the Disinherited, Howard Thurman wrote, quote, "The masses of men live with their backs constantly against the wall. They are the poor, the disinherited, the dispossessed. What does our religion say to them? What does religion offer to meet their own needs? The search for an answer to this question is perhaps the most important religious quest of modern life." Now, what if this quote were changed to read, "The masses of women live with their backs constantly against the wall. They are the poor, the disinherited, the dispossessed. What does our religion say to them?" Indeed, what does our faith, our spirituality, our systems of morality, however we may define them, what did it all have to say to the invisible women who have their backs against the wall in this era of mass incarceration? For now, let's say nothing at all and just listen. Listen to these amazing, inspiring women on the panel tonight, as well as all those in the audience who not only knows what it means to have one's back against the wall, but also who have some idea about how we might begin to tear down those walls, reach out to one another, and reimagine what justice, freedom, and liberation could actually mean in our lives. With that, I'd like to introduce Natasha, who will get this evening started with an invocation. Natasha?
Good evening. My name is Natasha Terry Robinson, and I'm a woman with an incarcerated loved one and an Essie Justice Group Fellow. My husband, Silas, is currently incarcerated in a California state prison. Silas was sentenced to 25 years to life when he was only 17 years old. Our 5 children and I await every hour of every day for Silas to return home to us. This summer, I attended a healing retreat with women who, like me, have a loved one that is incarcerated or who themselves have been behind bars. As I reconnected with nature in the beautiful California redwoods in the company of my Essie sisters, I rediscovered my love for poetry. Tonight, I would like to share that poem that was inspired by being in the company of lovely women. As I sit next to the noisy creek, there is a great deal of noise. However, it comforts me. I reflect on the earth and how mankind always suggests that we should look up. Does the earth not have a place? Does the earth get credit for her strength and ability to hold us, to support our steps along our journey? She has witnessed life come and go. She houses motionless bodies while releasing their spirits. She claims no ownership of anything. She simply is. Her wisdom is older and wiser than anything. She holds the cure to every disorder or disease. She never boasts or retains ego. She simply is. She is available to listen, to receive our tears, our joys, our pains. She provided an escape route for my ancestors and holds the way for us. Her love endures from generation to generation without judgment or desire. She simply is. At this time, I would like to call on the Creator of all things, who gives life and love to all humanity. I would like to ask your permission to call into this space women who, like Mother Earth, are unseen as they hold and guide us. I would like to call on the courageous love of the woman who drives 300 miles each weekend to visit her husband in prison and returns home to raise their children. I would like to call on the wisdom of the woman who is right now sitting in a prison cell, writing a letter to encourage her daughter to keep up with her homework, longing for the day to be released to see her daughter graduate from high school. I would like to call on the strength of the little girl who holds back the tears as she presses her hand against the scratched jail visiting window that separates her from the loving touch of her mother. I would like to call on the courageous love, wisdom, and strength of these women tonight so that the chains of the silence and isolation may one day be broken. We call into this space the powerful presence of millions of women living in this turbulent era of mass incarceration. Though we may be shaken, we are unbroken. I and we invoke the commitment of those who came before us and were not afraid to speak to the mountains and command it to move. We call upon the spiritual truth that says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Together and here tonight, we invoke your compassion and all-seeing gaze as we come together in a conversation rooted in our ancestral strength, and so shall it be.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Natasha. That was beautiful and powerful. Thank you for sharing with us. I'd like to now ask our panelists to take the stage. Gina Clayton, Susan Burton, Teresa Younger, Andrea James. Well, this is sort of a dream for me to have the opportunity to be in dialogue with these four amazing women. And I should note at the outset that this isn't the most diverse group of folks. If you haven't noticed, they're all black women up here. When I realized that our panel was going to be comprised of exclusively black women, I called a couple of the folks who I was brainstorming with and working with to organize this panel, and I said, maybe we should say this is a panel about the experience of black women in the era of mass incarceration, and thought about changing the title. But alas, the announcement had already gone out. And as I found myself worrying over the title, I heard Sojourner Truth whispering in my ear saying, "Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman?" And so we have four brilliant black women getting us started in our conversation tonight. But this is just the beginning of a conversation that must necessarily include women of all colors, all ethnicities, all faiths, all sexual identities, gender identities and orientations, women of all stripes and backgrounds. And so I hope you will indulge us in getting this conversation started. During the question and A period, we will open up the mic to have a dialogue with all those who have been directly impacted by this system of mass incarceration, including all those who have a loved one behind bars or have had a loved one behind bars or who has been incarcerated themselves at some point in their lives. We'd like to open this conversation in the Q&A period first and foremost to all women who have been directly impacted by the system and begin the dialogue there. I'm going to begin with our panel with Gina Clayton, who is the founder of Essie Justice Group, a phenomenal organization that is dedicated to providing support, training, leadership development, and assistance to women who have a loved one behind bars. Often when people think about the impact of our criminal justice system on women, the first thing they think about is people who are actually behind bars, locked in cages. Very rarely do people think first about those who have a loved one behind bars. I get a lot of mail from people who are either incarcerated or who have loved ones behind bars who desperately need legal assistance or referrals for help. Very, very often, these letters come from women who are writing about their children, their partners, their relatives, and struggling to fight for their freedom and to find necessary support, resources, so that they can survive during this period of trauma and difficulty. Essie Justice Group is there for these women. And a report issued last year demonstrated how critically important networks of support like this are. There was a study released showing that 1 in 4 women in the United States has an imprisoned family member. The figure is 1 in 2 for black women. 44% of black women have an incarcerated family member compared to 12% of white women. Mass incarceration impacts an extraordinary percentage of women in the United States, and too often, if we think about women impacted by the criminal justice system at all, we think only of those who are behind bars. Thanks to Gina and her phenomenal work and organization, that is beginning to change. Gina, could you tell us a little bit about the inspiration for founding your organization and why you believe we need to bring to the center of our conversations women who have loved ones behind bars?
Absolutely. Can everyone hear me? Good evening. Was this on? It just needs to be closer to my face. Okay. I want to actually just start by with a moment of gratitude for all of the women who are on this panel. Y'all know you sustain me in this work. Each woman here has been critical in my ability to find the courage to be able to move forward with the development and work at Essie. And I have to say that this is my sisterhood, as well as the broader Essie sisterhood. And Sophia Elijah is in the house, and I just am so grateful for the women leaders who have done so much to really lay the foundation for conversations like this to take place. It is with an immense amount of gratitude that I am looking forward to having this conversation tonight. So what brings me to this work? There are so many reasons, and women like Natasha are one of them. I had occasion recently to think about the roots of my work upon hearing, I think probably many of you already know, about the passing of Khalif Browder's mother, Vanita Browder, on Friday. This shook our community to the core. It shook me to the core. Most of us, particularly here in New York, know Khalif Browder and his mother's story, one where he was incarcerated at 16, pre-trial in Rikers, in a men's jail, where he endured violence and abuse so horrendous that after the 2 years that he spent, much of that in solitary confinement, he was still having to deal with the understandable amount of mental health and physiological impacts that all of that abuse had on his body and on his person, until the pain ended for him when he took his own life last year. Now, headlines read when Khalif's mother passed on Friday that she died of a broken heart. And this was one of the few headlines that I see about women that's accurate, that I felt like rang true. And there's I'm a woman with an incarcerated loved one. My loved one is serving his 9th year of 20 in a California prison. And now I speak a lot about the impact that experience had on my life and on people who I love. The confusion, the pain, the silencing, the isolation when there's no one within this environment that seems that you can talk to and reach out for help. I talk about the experience of being a woman with an incarcerated loved one through that, through him. But a part of the story that I don't tell, and I haven't until actually tonight shared publicly, is that not more than a year afterwards, his mother died. And she used to introduce me as her sister when we would go out and when we lived in LA together. And Khalif, there's so many parallels. Khalif was in on a robbery charge, my loved one's in on a robbery charge. So many of these things are just so, they just repeat themselves. And I think that for me, I am here because of women like Vanita Browder, because of women like Deshawn, who, when she passed, I thought, this is connected. And no one said it. No one said, her passing, there are other causes of death. But it was important for me to understand that when we take the final toll of death, and destruction and devastation, the lives that have been destroyed in this age of mass incarceration, that we count Vanita and that we count Deshawn, that they be included, because the pain that is being caused is not just to those who are incarcerated, and who, by the way, are not only men. And I think that has been completely one of these myths that we struggle with at Essie too, that the idea that we are a community of women who are here to support our incarcerated men, not at all. And so I think that for me, what brings me to this work, Michelle, is that I'm a woman with an incarcerated loved one, but I also am a woman who loved Deshawn.
Well, let me stop you right there. There's a video that I would very much like to share that was created by your organization that features women kind of attempting to describe their own experience of having a loved one behind bars. Could we show that video now? Maybe have the lights go down?
It feels empty. Just wring the system's neck. Just pound it into the ground. Just.
For a long time, I saw it like it was part of living.
It's just a way of life, but it's so exhausting. The logistics, money and resources, it's just a huge, massive burden.
Raising children, going to schools and parent-teacher night, and it's just me. I feel really alone. I do.
Our criminal justice system isn't as fair as it should be. Mass incarceration makes our country worse off, and we need to do something about it.
Mass incarceration is a human rights issue. It is a race justice issue, it is an economic issue, and it's a women's issue.
Sisterhood is powerful!
My name is Star.
My name is Taylor.
Natasha.
Catalina Palacios.
Journey. Sylvia Rubio.
I have a son.
Husband.
Brother.
Sisters.
Fiance.
Son.
2 brothers.
Niece.
Father.
Father. Uncle. 2 cousins. And an aunt in prison.
We are fighting to end mass incarceration.
One of the things you shared with me just as the lights went down is how difficult it is to speak publicly about the pain associated with having a loved one behind bars. And I wonder if you would share a little bit about what Essie Justice Group is doing to provide desperately needed support and sisterhood for women who are going through this experience and may feel alone, even though in the case of Black women, 1 out of 2 women are sharing the experience, and women overall, 1 out of 4. What is the role of your organization in providing support and contributing to the movement?
So Essie Justice Group is building a loving and powerful community of women with incarcerated loved ones to end mass incarceration's harm to women in the United States. We've developed a Healing to Advocacy 9-week model, which is created by women with incarcerated loved ones, through which we bring women into our sisterhood. Women come to us through a process of nominations, and our most important partners are incarcerated people who nominate women in their lives to our program. So we'll receive these letters that say, "Dear Essie Justice Group, my name is Sarah, and I'm incarcerated, and I want to tell you about my daughter because she's incredible. She comes to visit me, she sends me packages, and I want her to have the love and support on the inside that she's giving, or on the outside that she's giving me on the inside, and I nominate her to your group." And so we pick up the phone and we call that woman, and one of the first things that we say is that, "My name is Gina Clayton. I'm a woman with an incarcerated loved one, and I'm calling you today because I'm holding a letter from your mother. And she says that you are incredible. And would you mind if I read to you what she says about you?" And so that conversation proceeds. We end by saying, we want you to know that there's a community of women here who would benefit from knowing you. Would you come? And so the very first thing that women know is that we see them, is that their contributions and the work that they are doing to keep their families together in the midst of all of this craziness is seen and is appreciated. That we are not here to judge them or to stigmatize them, that we don't care what anyone may have done or didn't do. That's not what we're about. Would you come because you are needed? So women come. Oftentimes women only come when they're told they are needed, not because this is something for them. They put themselves last on the list. And so it's a little bit of a bait and switch, because the first thing that we do is heal and embark upon journeys of healing together. And by the end, women are advocating. We've had women go to Sacramento to advocate for different pieces of legislation to make systemic reforms, speak out at Washington, D.C. They've been featured in publications, and all in an effort to break the silence and to make change through the voices of these incredible women. I'll just end by saying that to join the sisterhood, we actually take a pledge. All women, at the end of their 9 weeks, they graduate and are invited into the sisterhood. And the pledge that we take is that I, fill in your name, pledge to break the invisibility and the isolation of women with incarcerated loved ones, starting with myself.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to go to Andrea James, who I've been eager to meet for some time. This is my first opportunity to meet her in the flesh, so I'm excited about that. Andrea is the founder of an organization called Families for Justice as Healing, which focuses on raising awareness about the incarceration of women and the impact on children and communities. And what I love most about your organization is that it is dedicated to shifting our understanding of what justice is, from punishment to healing and wellness. I would also like to encourage people to read her book. It's a wonderful book, Bunkies Unite, and Other Thoughts on the Politics of Mass Incarceration. It's a great, incredibly engaging read and filled with really deep insight. And so I hope you'll share your journey from being a public defender to someone who was actually incarcerated herself, and how that experience has helped to transform your own understanding of the criminal justice system and the kind of work that is necessary in the moment.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and I want to say thank you for providing this opportunity to raise the level of voices and experiences of women who have been affected by this system. And I want to just also thank the women who are on this panel with me, Gina and Susan, and I'm just meeting my sister here, but I have to say, Gina and Susan are women that I have followed in this movement. Susan Burton in particular is a woman that I have followed since being incarcerated myself and just trying to figure out how to navigate through using our voices. I just want to also take 2 seconds to say thank you to all of the women who are formerly incarcerated women, who are members of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, who are in this room tonight. And they're an incredible group of women who are no different than the women of Essie group, because we are all absolutely connected. And women like Kathy Boudin and Missy and Susan Rosenberg and Lois Aarons and Star Patterson, Topeka Sam, and mostly, and Carol and Sophia Elijah, who has been our warrior for us. And my mom is here tonight. And I just want to say, and my mom is I want to say this because my mom is 83 years old. And when I talk about, she's right here, raise your hand, Mom. She doesn't let me go far anymore. I think she's a little nervous that my dad is sick for the first time in his 86 years, so he's not here, but he usually travels a lot with me as well. Hey, Bunky, is Ivy. But my mom, when we talk about how I was brought to this work, I was brought to this work because I come from how I describe my family as educator activists. I come from a long history of black folks from a very proud community called Roxbury, Massachusetts, who have worked for decades, for generations. My children are the 4th generation to live in our home in Roxbury. I'm very proud of that. So when I talk about how I was onboarded onto this work, I was onboarded because it was a birthright. It was something that I was born into and something that I was taught to use my voice to fight against injustice. And that grew into following the footsteps of my late great-uncle Reginald Alleyne, who was the first black tenured law professor at UCLA, and bringing the interest to me of wanting to become a lawyer. And of course, coming from a community, I had the privilege of attending a very prestigious school in Massachusetts, private school, most of my academic young years. And I noticed immediately by the time I was 12 years old that the children in my community of Roxbury were going to prison. Their brothers were going, and mostly it was men at that time. Mostly we did see our older brothers, our loved ones, going into the prison system for what they're now calling an opioid epidemic, was heroin. And they found every way to criminalize black boys and men in our community who were struggling with the illness of addiction. But heroin existed in these other very elite communities that I was privileged to be a part of. The drugs were just as prevalent. They were just as available. They were just as used. But those children went away for a couple of months and came back and came to prestigious places like where we're sitting today. They came back to Yale University and to the Harvards of the world. And they went on to develop policy that unfortunately they didn't remember the experiences they had and the struggles that they were allowed to overcome. So really, my experience in this really came from all of that. And I did become a criminal defense lawyer, and I did work for many years, even prior to becoming a lawyer, in my community and in the communities, the urban communities of Boston, Massachusetts, to try and understand and to bring some justice to people who had largely just been not forgotten about, but made invisible, as Michelle referred to, because they're not forgotten about. They're remembered. But how they're remembered and how their lives are shaped and moved is very different. And so I became a lawyer and was a criminal defense lawyer and did this kind of work from within a courtroom, which is very difficult to do. It's kind of a motions game where you're just throwing stuff up and hoping something will stick. But doing the work nonetheless, and also as a real estate conveyance lawyer in the height of predatory lending. Because in addition to decades of mass incarceration, our communities have been under siege by a very predatory, nefarious, criminal enterprise called the lending industry, the mortgage industry. And in communities like where I grew up in Roxbury, Massachusetts, and other predominantly poor Irish communities like Charlestown and South Boston, those communities were heavily under siege by predatory lending, the most nefarious criminal mortgage products that stripped homes like ours, where 4 generations of our children grew up. So you're taking more than brick and mortar, or we call clapboard in Boston, you're taking homes and actual histories of families when mortgage companies are allowed to come in their criminal and nefarious ways and strip the entire histories of families. So in addition to mass incarceration, we were then under siege with that. And I went to prison. As a real estate conveyance lawyer, I did some things that were wrong. They were unethical, and I went to prison for that. But I can't tell you, after years, I was 45 years old when I went to prison, okay? I had worked within the criminal legal system in this country for 22 some odd years. I didn't think there was anything. I'm married to a man who served a 10-year mandatory minimum federal drug sentence that was separated from our children, his children. I didn't think at the time that there was anything that anybody could tell me about how broken this system was until I became an incarcerated woman myself. And my last child was, I had adult children, and my baby girl is a sophomore at Spelman right now. I'm very happy about that. She was 12 years old when I went to prison, just at the start of her years when she most needed her mother. But I also had given birth. I had 2 older adult daughters, and my baby girl was 12. At 45, I gave birth to my last child, and he's 7 now. We call him Lucky as a nickname because he's daggone well lucky to be here, me having him at 45. But I gotta tell you, I left my son in the arms of my mother and my older children and my husband and my father in the parking lot of a federal prison in Danbury, Connecticut. And I walked into that prison and it forever changed my life. Something that I didn't think I could learn anything more about. I walked into that prison and I met women who I had to navigate 18 months of separation, being in another state, 3 hours away from my children, including my baby boy who was 5 months old when I walked into that prison and had to leave him in that parking lot. My experience pales in comparison to the majority of the women that I was in prison with. Women like Donna Hilton, who literally spent 27 years in Bedford Hills right here in New York. Women who are just the most courageous, unbelievably resourceful, brilliant. They are the experts that we need to rely upon to create change in this system. And I had to figure out how to navigate 18 months of getting through a system that was just cruel, beyond belief. And listening to the women and learning their stories. These women didn't have to navigate months. They had already been there for 18 years. These women that you see in front of you are women that we have a tiny opportunity to get out of prison. Some of them, about 5 of them that you're looking at, they're free because we have gone to the mat to try and get them released. They are women in the federal system, and federal women, don't get it confused. We're state women. We all are state women. We come from states. We all come home to states, but we are shipped in the federal system thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away from our children and loved ones, the same families that Gina is talking about and are members of her organization. So these women right here are part of President Clinton, President Obama.
Yeah, that one.
That one. Clemency Project 2014, and I asked Michelle for permission for us to put the women's pictures up because we really don't have any more time to talk about anything else from our perspective as formerly incarcerated women from the federal system than to bring our sisters home. We have about 5 women down here right now that have been home, including the last baby girl, Danielle Metz, who was released after years, who went to prison as a very young girl, same age as Donna Hilton at the age of 19. And spent decades in a prison. If we don't bring these women home, these women will spend the rest of their lives in the federal prison where they have already been for 15 and 20 years. Please do not leave here without taking note, taking a picture, taking something, and taking these women's names out of this space with you. When President Obama leaves office, the window will have closed for us to do this. These women have already served far beyond what should be a just and fair sentence. When there are no just and fair sentences in a fabricated, mean, intentional system that was never designed to have a war on drugs. It was designed to control and contain poor people and predominantly people of color, women being now the fastest growing incarceration population in this country. So we hope that you will help us. Yes, I started Families for Justice's Healing. I started it in the prison yard in Danbury, Connecticut, sitting around a picnic table with 5 other women that were in that prison with me. And we knew that we had to use our voices because, yeah, it was a missing voice at the table, a very egregious missing voice at the table that we needed to elevate. And that was the voice of the women who have been most affected. And it doesn't start or end at the prison wall. Just as Gina said, mass incarceration is not just about people who are sitting in a prison or sitting on a bunk. Mass incarceration is more, really, the accurate term for it is the carceral state, which has many elements to it that have that reach far into our community and oppress and control the lives of the people that we're talking about today. So I thank you for the opportunity to begin this discussion about what we're here for. There's so much more that we could talk about, but I really wanted to have an opportunity to raise up and make aware of why these women are here in front of us, and that all of the work that we're doing right now in what we now call, our work has evolved to the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. And the work that we're doing, our mission is to unapologetically raise up the issue of women, raise up their voices, but our goal is to end incarceration of women and girls. Thank you.
Well, the next person I'm going to introduce, Susan Burton, has become a bit of a sister to me. She's the person I call up when I'm losing hope, the person who I turn to make sure I've not completely gone off the rails. And she's someone who I deeply admire and have admired since the days when I was actually doing the research on my book. When I was working on writing the new Jim Crow, I stumbled across an interview with Susan Burton in which she spoke her truth with such clarity and conviction about what it means to be saddled with a criminal record and to be forced to check the box on employment applications, housing applications, applications for welfare, for financial aid, for schooling, what it means as a human being to be treated like a second-class citizen with no hope of ever being welcomed again back into the mainstream society. Susan is someone who is definitely among my personal heroes. She's someone who is formerly incarcerated, and after being released from prison and having access to a drug treatment program, decided that she was going to dedicate the rest of her life to ensuring that no other woman would ever have to go through what she went through. And she now runs 5 safe homes for formerly incarcerated women in Los Angeles. The organization she founded is called A New Way of Life. And not only do these homes provide desperately needed support services, housing, job training and access to employment, help with reunification with children, but also she's training women to become leaders in the movement for the restoration of basic civil and human rights. She's also a co-founder of All of Us or None, and she has a book coming out about her life called Ms. Burton, so look for it when it comes out. Before I let you speak, Susan, I'd like to show a short video about your work and your life and the contributions that you've made. There's a much longer video that I actually recommend called Susan. You can YouTube it or find it on A New Way of Life's website. But I asked her if there was a shorter version that we might be able to show tonight, and it turns out that Starbucks has honored her as an upstander in their campaign and produced a short 5-minute video about Susan's work and contributions. So thanks to Starbucks, we have a short video about Susan tonight. Can we have the video?
I was in and out of prison for 20 years before I found help. When I was released the last time, the guard says, "You'll be back. We'll have a bed waiting for you." And I say, "No, I won't come back." But deep down inside of me, I pray that I won't spend all my life caged and chained up. I was born and raised in Los Angeles when my son, KK, was 5. He was playing, he was in the streets. He ran out and the car hit him. After his death, I just unraveled and crumbled. I began to drink, and that escalated to using illegal drugs. After I found help in the community, I was able to get up on my feet. I got a job, worked and saved my money, and I got a house. And I would go down to the bus station and wait for women to get off the bus. And I'd say, "Hey girl, I have a house, and if you want a place to come and live, you can have a bed there." I knew hundreds of women that just needed a few months of support to be able to stand on their feet and not return to prison. Since I've opened the doors at A New Way of Life, we've gone from 1 house to 5 houses. We've helped over 1,000 women come back into the community. You got to stay on the path, no matter what comes in your path, because as long as you're living, they're going to happen.
I did not grow up or come up thinking I want to be a failure, I want to be a convict, I want to be an addict. Those are not the goals or the dreams and the hopes that I have for myself. I've always wanted to go to school and be something and be somebody, but the streets had a stronger hold on me at that time. The better half of my life was spent in and out of prison, in and out of my addiction, and hanging out with gang members. I knew I needed to get some stability and structure in my life. I got on that computer and immediately applied for school. I will be getting an associate's degree, and my specialty is the psychology of substance abuse.
We have an incarceration crisis in America. The recidivism rate in California is about 75%. Last year at A New Way of Life, we flipped the numbers. Our recidivism rate was 13%.
The most important thing A New Way of Life provided for me was a way out of my old neighborhood, where I can focus on what I really want to do with my life without the outside distractions. I'm 49 years old, and since elementary school, I've been wanting to graduate from college. So, this is a very monumental moment for me.
When I see a woman getting the support she needs to make her life better, thereby making her child's life better, you think about the generations to come, how we're changing that.
Carolyn Robinson.
It's a vicious cycle to return to an environment in which led to your incarceration, and it happens over and over again. That is the cycle that I'm trying to break. That is the cycle that we must break.
You can lean to the side.
So it still touches and moves me every time I see Carolyn, you know, understanding the struggle and the dreams that, you know, we have, that we all have, and so, and how difficult it is for some people to be able to reach those dreams and those goals. So, when I got help after 6 prison terms, I thought was so much, I said, this is so much more humane, so much more useful and productive than being shipped off somewhere to prison. And why? You know, why hadn't it happened early on? Why, when my 5-year-old son was killed, accidentally killed by a police officer, hadn't someone reached out to me and said, you know, we have grief help for you. We have, you know, somewhere you can go to help you deal with what you're feeling with your loss. Why did I get handcuffs instead of that? And why did I return to the community, same community that was just raging with drug use in the height of the war on drugs? Why did I have to access services in the West Side beach city of Santa Monica instead of in South LA, where I was born and raised and where so many women were coming back to that community? Why couldn't we access services there? So all those whys led to my beginning to question what was going on, and my feeling if I could give just a little bit of what I had received in Santa Monica in South LA, just perhaps, just maybe perhaps, it would make a difference in the lives of the women coming back into that community, my friends. So when I was able to save a little money, I got a little house and I'd wait at the bus station. And eventually, through communication, I stopped going to the bus station and women started writing letters. And then I'd pick them up from the prison, or if the prison was too far, I'd pick them up a little bit closer. But the whys began to get me a little angry about it all. And sometimes anger can spur action. I didn't have to internalize it. It could be a useful tool for energy for change. And then I began to go to meetings where I heard about, you know, the rate of incarceration of women. And then I began to kind of forgive myself because, you know, before that, I thought something was wrong with me. You know, something was wrong with me that I would keep going to prison and not be able to get it right. And then looking at all of our experience collectively, like nothing's not wrong with me, something's wrong with the world. I need to stand in the meetings that I'm going to and let them know something's wrong with the world. So I was the oddball in all of the meetings. But I stood and I stayed, and much has shifted now. I think you had a lot to do with that shift. My first read of the new Jim Crow, I stood up on my knees in the book with the book and just kept flipping pages in the bed. I couldn't sit down and read it. I had to rise in the center of the bed because it explained to me so much that had happened in my life and why it had happened. While it didn't make sense, it was very harsh and very mean, but it explained to me why it had happened. And then there was another level of forgiveness and commitment, for the forgiveness for myself, and commitment to fight even harder. And I want to thank you for that. And when you called me, emailed me and said this panel was happening, I had planned to go to New Orleans with my sister, and I think I got the tickets the day before, but I'm like, yeah, I'm coming. So I called my sister, and I rearranged the flight, and we came here. And my sister, I have in my mother's household, I have 5 brothers and no sister. And I always used to tell my mother I wanted a sister. And I met my sister when I was about 7 years old. And she lived in Long Beach, I lived in Los Angeles, and we didn't get to come back together until we were on the prison yard. And her name came out in the movement sheet. And then I waited for her to come to the main yard. And so we were sisters inside of the prison. And we would separate again. And so we get to come here. And we've been here. And it's just such a full circle moment for me. So that's my sister, LaRonda. But there's so much, to be done. So I do have a book coming out on women, and we're kind of working with the working title, Miss Burton, to the publishing title. So, and it's about women and the experience of women. In California, women are 3% of the census of the population. Black women. And black women are 33% of the incarcerated female population. So that's stark, and that's something really, really wrong with that. With the young women here, Gina and Andrea, Gina and Andrea, and the younger people coming along, I feel hopeful that things are going to change, and that the fight is going to continue long enough for something to actually change. Yeah. I think this moment, I haven't seen this moment since I've been, in the fight, a good couple of decades. So I'm hopeful that we'll, get to that tipping point, and it will definitely shift, and that people, women and men, black and brown and yellow and red, will be able to walk without the burden that's been placed on them because of criminal histories, and be able to live full lives, and our children have opportunity. I'm optimistic, so I have to be hopeful about that. So I want to thank you again, Michelle, for having this panel and inviting me here. And along with everyone else.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very, very much. Well, lastly, I have the pleasure of introducing Teresa Younger, who is the president and CEO of the Ms. Foundation, which organization I hope most of you are familiar with, which is dedicated to building women's collective power in order to ensure greater justice for all of us. And She has been on the front lines of most of the most important battles for racial and gender justice, economic security, women's health. The list goes on of the work that you've been at the forefront of doing. She was the first African American to serve as the executive director of the ACLU of Connecticut, and has been deeply engaged in issues of civil rights and civil liberties for a long time. I was thrilled that you agreed to participate on this panel. I know of your own kind of personal commitment to women who are impacted by mass incarceration. But I also was looking forward to hearing your thoughts and perspectives about kind of the role of women's rights organizations in this period. I know that within many circles there's been concern about women's rights organizations not necessarily placing criminal justice reform or the issues of mass incarceration at the top of the agenda. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about kind of your own relationship to this work, but also your thoughts about perhaps why women's rights organizations have been slower to embrace criminal justice reform work, and what your views are about the future of women's rights organizations in relationship to this work.
Wow. Okay. First off, I want to thank my sisters at the table. I've been a long admirer, actually, when you were at the ACLU, Michelle, of the work that you were doing and have done, and I'm so proud and honored to be here today. I've known Gina for just over a year now, and when I met Gina about a year ago, I had gotten an email asking if I would be willing to talk to Gina. And I said, of course, and we sat down for a cup of coffee, and she proceeded to tell me about Essie Justice Project. And I knew at that moment that this was a sisterhood that I was already part of. You see, even though it doesn't necessarily come off as such, right, because we all have stories that we hold and that we tell. You know, I have formerly incarcerated loved ones, and as a black woman, as a sister, as a niece, as a daughter of many in this country, there's a real reflection that this work has always been part of what we do. And so, you know, I come to this work in a philanthropic space at the Ms. Foundation very differently than sometimes people come to philanthropy, because I come to it as a social justice activist. I spent my entire life trying to figure out, how do you do the right thing? How do you make the world a better place? And how do we create a more fair society? Because in all reality, it is way messed up. And we didn't have anything to do with it. So I start with that. I have to tell you, I met Susan just this past year, and talk about being inspired every second of the day. And I actually had read about Andrea. So when we were sitting next to each other, I was trying to contain my silly anxiety and excitement about the honor of being up here today. I want to start my comments with an Audre Lorde quote, because I think it is reflective of the work that I try to do. She wrote, "I write for those who do not speak, for those who do not have a voice because they are so terrified, because we are taught to respect fear more than ourselves. We've been taught that silence will save us, but it won't." And those are the words by which I do the work at the Ms. Foundation, and that I've done the work of social justice activism all of my life. At the Ms. Foundation, we've fought for over 40 years to amplify the voices of women, particularly focusing on women of color and those whose identities have been rendered invisible. And continue to be invisible until we help give them voice. Many of the women that we are working with are much along the stories that we heard today. What we believe in the work that we do at the Ms. Foundation is that women hold the truths to the issues in their lives and the things that can heal us to move us forward. And we know that that driving force means that we all have to stop and listen. We have to listen to the uncomfortable stories, and we have to be able to move forward in what those uncomfortable stories tell us. Women have not been prioritized in our society, and we know this, and it's not a joke, it's true. And women of color have even less been prioritized in our society. It is regardless of age, at any point, women of color are not seen as oftentimes even human. And we don't even need to go too far to even explain what that looks like when we think of what's happening in school push-out programs, what's happening with women who are incarcerated, currently incarcerated and have previously been incarcerated. So I try to come to this work from a perspective that's reflective, but also recognizing that I don't have the answers. Many of these women have the answers. My mother shared an answer, right, because her sons were in prison. We share different components of the answers that need to be told to us. But we also have to recognize the challenges of society. That even though I am in a feminist organization, it is a feminist organization that is built upon a patriarchal facade. And we have to understand that that is a reality, that any amount of work we are doing is predicated on a white male supremacist structure in this country, because that's how this country was built. I will tell you that we at the Ms. Foundation have been trying for a long time to figure out a long time. I've been with the Ms. Foundation for 2 years. So in the 2 years, I've tried to identify how do we use our voice most effectively to address many of the issues that we see. And part of that is speaking truth to power. Part of that is acknowledging this world that we are in. Part of that is recognizing that 7% of philanthropic dollars go to women and girls in this country, and even less than that go to women and girls of color. Even less than that are going to women and girls of color in the incarcerated system. Like, there is just nothing going on. We're not having a conversation about mass incarceration or mass criminalization, because in our minds, women who have been put in that position for whatever is going on are wrong and bad. And it makes us feel better to create a hierarchy about what is going on in our society. So if your son, your daughter, your niece, your nephew is incarcerated, you as a mother are put to blame, right? And you as a mother are expected then to carry forward the responsibilities of what needs to happen, whether that means you don't pay your light bill so that you can send some money to the commissary, or so that you can have bus money to get up and visit your child, or so that you can have money for your grandchild's school. Those are all very real systems, and in this country we're not having any real conversation. And in fact, the mass incarceration and mass criminalization in this country has actually helped push down all outcomes for women of color in this country, if you ask me. And I think that because we have, if you look at any of the disparities on any number of things in this country, whether it is around equality, whether it is around economic justice, whether it is around health, whether it is around safety, the reality is those disparities are much more significant for women of color. And in many ways, it's much more significant for black women and poor women. This past year, you asked what was happening in this space. So I could go on and on, but I won't go on and on about that because these women are much more eloquent about it. This past year, I wanted to make sure that we were positioning the work and challenging philanthropy and challenging each other to think a little broader about this issue. And, you know, we account for only 5% of the world's population in this country, right? Women account for 5% of the world's population. We incarcerate 1/3 of the world's women prisoners, with 2/3 of them being women of color. Let me give you those data points again, and I know we're not supposed to get into data points, but I think it really makes a point to what's going on. U.S. women account for 5% of the world's population of women. We incarcerate nearly 1/3 of the world's women prisoners, with 2/3 of those being women of color. So if we don't step out and call out and acknowledge what is happening to women of color, then we're not having a very real conversation. Last year, the Ms. Foundation, in conjunction with the Georgetown Law Center on Poverty and Inequality and the Human Rights Project for Girls, put together a report, and the report was called the Sex Abuse to Prison Pipeline. It actually stopped and answered the rest of the questions that we know to be true that we just didn't talk about, like the heightened level of sexual abuse of those women who are incarcerated, the reaction of what that has, and we found that no matter the age, girls of color were being sexually abused and yet not being seen as victims at all. And in the report, we talked a lot about how the criminal justice system is, as we know, just plagued with bias, both racial, ethnic, race, gender, and when it comes to that bias being input on young women, they are never seen as the victim. They are always seen as the perpetrators and the people that are driving the crime. So we launched a new strategy at the Ms. Foundation for Women. And we've launched it in a way that is making some people a little uncomfortable, and we will see how it goes. The new component of our work is actually being led by our safety program officer, Nikisha Lewis, and it will address the issues of mass criminalization, sexual abuse and violence, and state-sanctioned violence that undermine the well-being of Black women, both cis and trans women in this country. And we are one of the few, if not the only, that is actually centering Black women at a conversation around what safety looks like. In its broadest context, think about it if you are a 7 or 9-year-old girl in a hyper-sexualized society, and let's not even get into the politics of what's happening with the misogynistic attitudes that are going on TV in front of us, but you are getting catcalled and violently catcalled from the streets, then you grow up only knowing that kind of violence. So each level of violence that is perpetrated upon you just builds up on you and weighs you down in many different ways. So what we're hoping to do is to co-create with the women that we are working with, the 7 organizations that we are working with, to co-create, because we trust that they hold the answers to how we need to define true safety in this country and then what that needs to look like. And that is something I'm very proud of as, the first African American, the first Black CEO at the Ms. Foundation in 35 years. So you asked a question, Michelle, about why aren't women's rights organizations, why haven't they come on board in this conversation? Not everybody's going to come on board in every conversation. And in all reality, much of the women's rights community has not been reflected of those that have been most impacted by mass incarceration or criminalization. There's just not a conversation happening. There's a greater conversation happening around pay equity, greater conversation happening around breast cancer, greater conversation. If you think about it, more women of color know somebody, have an incarcerated loved one, right, or have been incarcerated themselves, then will get breast cancer. And yet, the NFL, for the whole month of October, will wear pink. Okay. If you think about it, right, the number of women who will be sexually assaulted in this country, equivalent in college, is 1 in 4, right? That's what we believe the number to be. We just learned that 1 in 4 women in this country have an incarcerated loved one. And yet we are talking about sexual abuse on college campuses, but not the broader sexual abuse that is happening to young women of color in this country. So while I would like to give you the answer to why the women's community is not taking on more of a position in this space, I've only been in this space on a national position for 2 years, and I think they will. I think they are willing to come on board. I think there is a way to force and push a conversation, and it comes in ways like this. It comes from us coming together and actually acknowledging what those disparities are in our society and becoming comfortable with the language we need to use to hold the conversation. Because nothing changes in our society if people are comfortable. Honest to goodness, if prison was the best space to be, you would be there every day, right? You wouldn't have thought about why you needed to get out. If your family could have come and visited you and stayed with you the entire time, there would have been no conversation about what was going on. When you're uncomfortable, you make change happen. And so there are different levels of comfort in our society, and we have to acknowledge that. My level of uncomfortableness is not going to be the same as with everybody else here. But I do think in the women's rights community, I think as we pursue a broader conversation around what women's rights look like, and that the women's movement is not any one movement. The women's movement really should be a conversation about the movements that affect the lives of women, because we are engaged in every single movement out there, and that is how we are going to be seeing these issues. And they become totally connected when we look at them that way. So I don't talk at the MIDS Foundation about the women's movement. I don't talk about the women's rights movement. I talk about the movements that affect the lives of women, particularly those that have been most marginalized in our country. And I think it is time for us to not stay silent, because we know that doesn't get us to the change that we want to get to. So I think I will stop, because I could talk on, and I want to thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. All right. I very much want to bring our community here into dialogue with our wonderful panelists. And I would like to ask again that those who come to the microphone at this time let's first create space for women who have incarcerated loved ones, or people who have ever been family members who have ever been incarcerated at some point, people who have been directly impacted, either been incarcerated themselves recently or at some point in their lives. And then if we kind of exhaust the comments from people who have been directly impacted, we'd be very happy to hear from others. But I really want to hold this space for people who have been directly impacted. So you can come to the microphone and share a question, comment, and be mindful of the fact that others may be wishing to speak as well. So please, I hope people will contribute to the conversation and the dialogue. And while people are moving to the microphone, I'm going to pose one more question to our panel, which is, I would be very interested to hear, and this is really a question for any one of you, what would you say to people who, like me, once would argue about, well, women's experience with mass incarceration is important, but at this moment, we ought to focus on the experience of men, because most of the people who are incarcerated are behind bars. In terms of the numbers of people who cycle in and out of our criminal justice system, most are men. Your issues are important, we care, but we're not going to make it the focus of the work or bring women and girls to the center of the dialogue now. How do you respond to those who view the experience of women as more of a footnote in this era of mass incarceration rather than an experience that should be brought to the center? How do you respond?
I'm happy to too.
Yep.
Okay. So I would just say this: the moment that we address the most marginalized communities, we will make the greater strides for the broader public. So we need to look at the least numbers and actually try to address that, because sometimes it becomes so overwhelming to address an entire system. If we fix the system for women in a much more inclusive way, and we break down the barriers and we start redefining what needs to happen, it will make changes in the male prison system and in incarceration. And so I would say we must always listen to the voices of the most marginalized and center those in conversation in order to make the change happen.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just quickly say that the women are the most undervalued segment of our incarcerated population. And if you drill down even a little bit more and look at the women as individuals, and you find out a lot of the reasons why most of the women who are incarcerated are there, is directly related to men. So if we focus on women, we will, one, raise up what even women, when we talked about the women's movement and why it hasn't addressed women, it's because we're talking about poor black women and the value that they do not have in society, even from other women in our society. So when we focus on women, we automatically begin to elevate that, and that elevates everybody within who are human beings. And then we also address the real reasons that need to be addressed as to why we have so many men who are incarcerated, And that issue helps to be addressed as well. So starting with women helps to open up and crack open the shell for all the other issues that need to be addressed.
I just want to say that when men are taken away, usually the women will hold the family together and make sure that, you know, the children are taken care of and the husband is visited in institutions. But when the women leaves, then the children fall to other systems, those Department of Children and Family Service systems and all the foster care. And, you know, that's the last fabric of our community that begins to unravel and disintegrate. And when you can't have any fabric strong in the community, which the women are the strong rooted in the roots of the community, then it just falls apart. So we begin to build this, what I'm seeing and what I identify as the children industrial complex that just begins to, what we have here is, you know, the school to prison pipeline, the children, the foster care pipeline, the prison, and the young folks. So that's my take on it, is that everything falls apart when the women are taken away.
Can I just, I'm just going to bring back a word that I heard Teresa, no surprise, mention earlier, which is patriarchy. I think anybody who is saying that we should not be focusing or as focused on what's happening to women needs to confront their patriarchal lens and narrative in a real way. When I was working as an attorney in Harlem, my entire practice, which was one to represent women in eviction cases after a criminal justice event. So a loved one or somebody in their family got, caught up in some way in a criminal case, and they would be the ones to fight for their homes. And my entire practice was deemed a collateral consequences practice, a collateral practice. And I think we need to challenge the way that we describe even what's happening to women. When we say that it's collateral to a criminal justice event, what's happening to women with incarcerated loved ones, or that the entire population of incarcerated women are collateral to, what we're invoking is a militarized term. When we see women, when we go into other countries and when horrible things happen abroad in war times, and you hear the word collateral damage, that word says, oops, it says, whoops, that wasn't what we intended to do. And so we don't have to problem solve around that consequence. It invisibilizes what happened. It absolves the person or the actor or the state that caused the harm, and it invisibilizes the harm itself. And so I think that there's something for me about this that is just about making sure that we're using the right words. When we say mass incarceration, we are fixating on the incarceration experience, which is important, of course, but if we expand our scope and say mass control, what happens? All of a sudden, we see the mass control of women's bodies. All of a sudden, we see the mass control of who women are allowed to be connected to and who they are allowed to love and how they are allowed to love. We can take into context the fact that women are forcibly sterilized in prison. We can take into context the fact that women have been deprived through the foster care system in indigenous communities of their loved ones and their right to be with their children. We can take into context a history of slavery in which we were taken and family members were taken from ourselves. The movies Taken feature a white man protagonist at center, and we are supposed to understand that something is happening to Liam Neeson that is bad because something's happening to the loved ones that are being taken from him. He is the central protagonist. So if we don't understand that we cannot make, it's hard for us somehow to make women and black women particularly, whose lives have been stripped, where we can't see our loved ones, where we can't have the relationships we want to have, where we can't make her the central protagonist. That's not because of statistics, that's because of patriarchy, and we need to confront that.
Thank you to all of you. All right, I would love to hear the first comment.
Wow, how do you follow that, right? My name is Colby Thompson, and I am a formerly incarcerated woman. I spent 10 years in Bedford Hills Correctional Facility with Donna Hilton, and inside we started to work on a bill that was called the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act with Sister Mary Nerney, our dear patron saint. And we are still working on that bill now in New York. And what I would like to say, first of all, Michelle, I'm reading your book for the second time because, you know, it raises, as you said, kneeling, standing up and reading it. You can't sit down. You can't sit still once you read this. And I've heard that 60 is the new 40. So, as a middle-aged white woman who was raised by a very progressive mother who always taught me that everyone was equal and to love all cultures and all races. And I was always concerned with racial inequality. I grew up in the 60s, and it was a very, you know, full of turmoil. But there was something about me being the skinny little white kid in the group that made me feel like maybe I shouldn't stand up and say something because they're going to say, who are you, you know, to speak in our favor. But that all changed the day I went to Bedford Hills because I witnessed mass incarceration live and in color, excuse the comment, live and in color. And I witnessed the absolute torture that we put people of color through in this country. And I am so proud to be able to stand in support of this movement as this middle-aged white woman who now knows what she's talking about because I did experience it firsthand. I have family that I will love forever, and I'm meeting new ones every day, you know, and I'm here in support of changing this system. It's totally rotten to the core, and it needs to be changed from the inside out, I might add. And I think that women can do that if we will stand up and speak. And I'm going to speak to every white person in this country that I can get a hold of and tell them that you are totally ignoring all the problems. People just, you know, they focus on what's happening in their lives, and they really don't understand what's really happening. So I stand in support in this movement, and we're going to do something.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your comments. You know, having worked in and around foundations over the past several years, I've often heard when speaking about how best to intervene and support community development in the so-called third world, that the first thing you need to do is to go and talk to the women. And that if you're going to send funds and support, you send it to the women. Because in most communities, women form, in many respects, sort of the backbone and the functioning network support system for any given community. And in the era of mass incarceration, I think we can see that in so many communities that have been hardest hit by mass incarceration, women are playing that role of holding families, holding support systems together as best they can. And if we believe that women are critically important change agents in other countries, it's baffling why we don't imagine that right here at home women can be powerful, important social change agents and movement builders to transform the criminal justice system as well. And so, you know, it's interesting as I hear everyone speaking here about the role women are playing in their own communities and the way in which this system has impacted them individually and their families and communities collectively. It seems obvious to me that one of the gifts of moving women towards the center of this dialogue, not to displace men, but to join men, the center of the dialogue is to make it impossible for us to remain stuck in conversations about criminal justice that just imagine that it's about victims versus offenders. Mm-hmm. If once women are moved back towards the center, you cannot help but talk about what justice means in the context of families, in the context of communities, in the context of health and equity overall. And so I'm grateful to all of you and hope that those who are contributing in this line as well talk about the unique contributions that women can make in this moment.
Good evening. I'd like to thank all the ladies for sharing their perspective. My name is Starlene Patterson. I'm a licensed social worker in the Department of Education in New York City. I'm also a formerly incarcerated woman who served almost 8 years in the federal system. Technically, I was supposed to serve 3, but 5 years because they can.
Mm-hmm.
Because they can. They control the process, and their job is to protect their system.
Mm-hmm.
I've also had the experience during my incarceration of watching 3 women, Susan Rosenberg, Kimber Smith, and Deanne Kaufman, be granted clemency from President Clinton. And I just want to speak to Andrea James and for her to share some light, because as you can see in the posters up front, some of the women have already received clemency from President Obama, but many of them have not. And the process and what it looks like for women getting clemency versus the men right now in this country, with a small window of opportunity, we have less than 3 months. I've just asked that Andrea shed some light on that process and how the men are being granted clemency more than women.
Yeah, I got that long list, and I was like, where's the women on this list?
Yeah.
Of people that got clemency? Go ahead. Yeah.
And the point I really just want to say is that there was a criteria that the Obama administration created for people to apply under the Clemency Project. We're trying to help the Obama administration to understand that all of the women that we are putting forward, which is all of them, but all of the women that we are putting forward that are lifers, that are serving life, fit into the criteria. There are no women on here that don't fit into the criteria that the Obama administration themselves created, and that there is no reason why any of these women that we see in front of us, and there are many more, but we're focusing because the window is closing on the women who are serving life with no possibility of parole. That is not something, that means these women that you're looking at will serve the rest of their lives incarcerated in a federal prison who have already been there for 15, 20, 25 years. And I don't believe in the difference between violent and nonviolent because it's a false construct. But if you want me to clarify it in the terms, if you want me to paint a picture so that people can better understand what we're talking about women who are there for nonviolent drug offenses, and most of them, we focus on mandatory minimums, and I'll be quiet after this, but I want this point to be made. It is not about, when it comes to women and incarcerations in this drug, whatever debacle, it is about the conspiracy laws, both on the state level and on the federal level, that we must bring to an end and we must change. Because the majority of the women who are serving sentences in prisons today are there because the prosecutors have a tool that they wield in a cruel way that is called the conspiracy tool, and it allows for convictions to be had that they would never, ever be able to prosecute and convict people other than that. So please, pay attention, help us to move these women out of prison.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stella.
Okay, we're going to take a couple more quickly. We're over time already, so we're only going to have a time for a couple more. Go ahead.
So I was lucky enough to be part of the
Correctional Association's 170th celebration. And that was a celebration to honor Michelle Alexander. And it was a celebration, right? It's honoring people that are fighting for civil rights and liberties. And no one you would think would cry at that event, but as there was someone on the red carpet crying their eyes out as they were trying to take a picture with Michelle Alexander, that person was me. I was trying to thank her for being that voice for people who couldn't speak for themselves, for being a voice for me, because you were speaking for me. And I've told you this already, you know that. I didn't have the strength then to speak in front of anyone and say that I was a formerly incarcerated person. And now I'm a part of the council for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and girls. I am a student at Columbia University. I don't have a nervous breakdown when I'm in public anymore. I'm still having a hard time, I cry. But thank you once again for being our voice, for giving us strength, for giving us, I don't know, for giving us hope and giving us just, Well, giving me strength. I want to thank you because, you know, like Susan, you're someone who came out and decided that it wasn't enough just to get your own life together, which you have beautifully and with great courage, but that you want to dedicate your life and your work to ensuring that others don't have the kind of experience that you have had. And, you know, my own view is that if this movement is to be successful, it's going to be because of people like you. And I'm so grateful for you, and I hope we can all thank you for your work and your commitment to being part of this movement for justice in a meaningful way. So thank you for all you are doing.
And Layla has a panel tomorrow. Layla has a panel that she did not shout out, but she has a panel discussion with Malika, the senior counsel from Google. She has some amazing women that are people in general who are on that panel, and it's tomorrow. When, Layla? And it's about the importance of
Yep, step to the mic, step to the mic. So there are many universities, including Columbia, who still have the box which asks people to disclose their criminal history information. Obviously, they don't hold it against you because I'm here, and there are other people who are also here, but it's a deterring factor. When I came across that box, I couldn't finish the application. I needed the support of a lot of people trying to convince me, you can do this, do it. So I want to take the box off because, as Andrea said, women are the highest, we're the fastest growing population in prison. So it's grown over 700% in the last 30 years, plus people of color are the ones being affected. So we're the ones that are being kept out of places like this because of the box. So if you can, yes, Roan. The Rona Auditorium.
Thank you.
Remove the box, Layla. Remove the box.
Yes.
Remove the box.
All right. Unfortunately, this is going to have to be our last question and comment. I apologize to the others in line. I'm very sorry. You have the last word.
Well, isn't that a privilege? Good evening, ladies. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be in the presence of... Sorry, it's a pleasure to be in the presence of you all. I came on the line with a question in mind, and also I wanted to raise that as a person directly affected by having loved ones in the penal system, I am also a former foster child, And so I came online with the question in mind about what were your views, any of the panelists, what were your views on how child protection or the child protection system impacts the lives of women and girls. But as I spoke, as I stood on the line, both Sister Burton, you spoke to it, Gina, you spoke to it, and Michelle, you spoke to it. What I do as a volunteer, I sit in as a community resource for families who are being affected by the system. There are mothers that are being denied the opportunity to reunify with their children right now, today in the city. And many people don't know that they can volunteer as a resource. I came to the work because of being directly affected and having a mother who had struggled with issues of substance abuse and had been in and out of the system for 23 years of my life. I'm 33 years old, and I want everyone to know that the child protection system across jurisdictions in this country are ruining families on a daily basis. And as I said before, denying mothers and fathers the opportunity to reunify with their children. So as we think and as we begin to reflect, even talk about and organize around the issues of mass incarceration, please think about what's happening to families and the vending of black and brown bodies. And that something needs to be done about it. And once again, my name is Tiffany McFadden. I'm a volunteer. I organize around this issue. And if there's anyone that's concerned about it and wants to do something about it, we should talk.
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Please. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Who's going to say a word?
You know, it's like Carolyn. It took $22,000 a year for 2 years for her to get an AA. That's housing, that's school, that's clothing, that's food, that's everything. And it was $60,000 upwards for her to be incarcerated per year. I watch women struggling at a new way of life to reunite with their children. I watch Department of Children and Family Services pay all these different levels of social workers and therapists and doctors to work with one children, upwards of $170,000 a year to keep that kid separated from their mother. And then that mother on the other end will struggle to meet all the requirements from Department of Children and Family Services without any help from that department. You know, sometimes she'll get a bus pass 2 weeks into the month to make all these different classes that she has to make. And it can wear a person all the way down. The things that the women have going for them at A New Way of Life is that we find the place, we make sure we, get it paid for, get it waived. They kind of know me around town, and I can call in a few favors to get them to meet all of that judge's requirements. And at the end of the day, when that woman has completed everything that that judge tells her to complete, they will still deny her reunification with that child. And so I've watched this year after year after year of this systemic breakdown and breakup of families where a young woman like Tiffany can't ever have the security that and the love and the bonding that she has to have with her, that she desires and her mother's desires to have with her. And I'm going to give you just my own example. I'm 65 years old. And my sister's in her 60s. She's a little bit younger than me. But this is the first time in our lifetime that we're still having sister time because of all of the mess that came in front of us. But you know, this children industrial complex that more money is put towards separate. Girl, you should be getting paid to go down there where you're going to do the work. But we really appreciate you volunteering. And if we don't step up and volunteer like women do and give all that they can give, it won't happen. Mm-hmm. All right. All right. Got it.
There you go.
Got it. Got it.
I want to say thank you to all of our panelists. If everyone could give them a round of applause, they've been phenomenal. Thank you to all of you tonight for being here.
Excuse me. You gotta come take it.